After Atwater got through, these two fellows came along, Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis. Squire was a newspaper man from New York State, and Edwin Davis was a physician from Chillicothe. They put together Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley, which is still, today, more than 150 years after publication, is the holy scripture for archaeologists concerning mounds and earthworks. Had these folks not done what they did in the 1840s, we wouldn't know as much as we do about the mounds and earthworks. Now, they didn't do all this themselves. They had people that contributed to their volume, but it was the first book published by the Smithsonian Institute. In it, they had this drawing by Charles Whittlesey of the Marietta Earthworks. And this is the Newark Earthworks, our next little stop or tour around Ohio, also done by Charles Whittlesey. Now, this is what Marietta Earthworks, the drawing looked like in the 1840s. 4 square miles of earthworks, walls. There were circles and squares and burial mounds, parallel walls and octagons and graded ways. And so there's almost a whole vocabulary of earthworks here. Anything that the Hopewell people built, there's something to represent that object here. This is what it looks like now. Pretty much wiped out. This is the circle and octagon over here and the great circle down here. When you look at it on there, had this been preserved, this is the biggest archaeological site outside the pyramids of Giza, single archaeological space. And Newark had to be built. The people bought land and they couldn't hold up a town because there was a bunch of artificial mountains in it, so they pretty much leveled them. But they did preserve a couple of them, but not for the reasons that you might think. So these are the only two of all this stuff. This is all that's saved. Although this little circle, part of it is in somebody's front yard, and this corner of an earthwork and a parallel wall and the square is still preserved, but all the rest of this is gone. This is the Great Circle, about 1,200 feet diameter, with an interior ditch. So they called it the old Indian fort, but if the Indians built it, why would they put the moat on the inside? You put a moat on the outside, because that's the way defensive postures are put together. This is what it looked like if you flew over in an airplane in the 1930s. The circular walls, this D-shaped thing on the inside was actually a pony track. That at one time, this was the state fairgrounds. That's maybe why it was preserved, because it was a neat place to have a fair. And so they had a grandstand here, and you can see the horse track that ran around the interior of the earthwork. A little bit later, the state fairgrounds moved out of town, and it became Idlewild Park, which is sort of like the Kings Island Cedar Point of its day. They had a switchback or a roller coaster. They had a skating rink, swimming pool. They had a hotel there. They had the racetrack. They had all this neat stuff in there. And that's why the space was preserved as well as it is today, because it was kind of a neat place to have an amusement park. Well, Idlewild Park went out of business with the Depression, like a lot of other things did. So one of the Depression-era programs, the WPA, or the 3C, the Civilian Conservation Corps, came in, tore down all the buildings, all the trappings of the amusement park, and restored the stuff, the mounds and the earthworks, or the earthwork wall especially. And this is one of the crews from the 1930s, what it looks like. We did an excavation there, and we found out these guys were really thirsty because there's a lot of beer bottles in the fill. But this is what it looks like now. This is the interior moat. This is the single gateway to get out of it. So it's not really a circle, because a circle would go all the way around. It's sort of like a 359-degree arc. And then there's a turnout on each side. But see the interior moat here. So if you're trying to defend people coming over the wall, you put this on the outside and fill it full of water and alligators or something. But you wouldn't put it here. This hinders your defensive posture, if anything else. And this is what it looks like looking to the interior of the Great Circle through the gateway. And there's a large mound back there called the Eagle Mound, which is actually, it sort of looks like a duck's footprint maybe. It looks maybe like an eagle with its wings spread, but it's actually a series of mounds that were hooked together. And this is what it looks like. 1, 2, 3. There's actually 4 of these mounds, and they're all sort of have the space between them filled in. These were excavated back in the 40s, and they found out there was a post pattern, that this covered up a location for a house. So if you have a sacred house, you don't just tear it down because it's a sacred house. You tear it down maybe, and then you cover it up with some sort of thing to protect the site's reverence. This is what our excavation looked like in the wall when we excavated in 1992. You see down here there's a truncated prairie soil where they took all the worms and the bugs and everything else off there because that's not a place to put their sacred enclosure structure. So what they did, they cleared this all out, and then they used different colored soils. That they notice this banding here, these yellows and brown soils. And this up on top, this is what the WPA did in the 1930s. So this sort of gives you a snapshot view of the entire construction sequence, starting down here at somewhere around 400 BC and going up until the 1930s. And even here you can see a post which maybe even came in after the 1930s. The circle and octagon across town was also preserved. It was a National Guard camp for a while, a Civil War training camp. Became a golf course in the early 1900s, although the Historical Society owned the property. They allowed it to become a golf course, and it is today, which is a big bone of contention between preservationists and natives and other people, that they don't like the golf course there. But as much as I disdain golf courses, and this one in particular, it's better than having all this subdivision over the site. At least it's still there. And they'll have to work out the details later, but the site is now preserved and it's never going to go anywhere, although to put it back to its pristine self would take a considerable amount of money and even more amount of maintenance. This is the circle. It's not as big as the Great Circle across town. You can see it's lower in profile. It's probably later in time. It's a little bit more stylized. And there's an observatory mound and a gateway that goes through the octagon. And if you stand on this observatory mound, sight through the gateway, through the middle of the octagon, you get this once-in-a-generation moonrise. These things are not just mounds and earthworks to separate space. They're also observatories. They're big data collectors. There are a lot of other things, but they're not just fancy piles of dirt. But these people were outside all the time. They kept track of the celestial happenings in the sky. And they built this observatory because knowledge is power. And to know, for the elite of their society to say that we know on a certain date that the moon's going to rise right here gives them a step up on everybody else. Well, if you go from the octagon mound and follow these walls straight south, Squire Davis said that they followed, or Whittlesey said they followed these walls for 7.5 miles and they continued. So Brad Lepper of the Historical Society did a lot of research actually and came up with this concept that there was a great set of parallel walls that connected the Newark earthworks that went from Newark up here across Hillendale down to Chillicothe, where we're going to be, I guess, tomorrow, to the next great center of Hopewell earthworks, the 12 miles of the Scioto Valley. This is what a Squire Davis map looked like of the site. You had the Dunlop earthworks up here, Cedar Bank, Hopeton, Mound City, Shriver Circle, Works East, the Harness Works, and the High Bank Works. Now these, we don't understand why these are all put together the way they are. Needless to say, they are. A lot of these are there, some of them aren't. If you want to look for Works East, you'll have to find the sewage treatment plant. That's where it is. High Bank is a little bit preserved. Harness mounds are pretty much gone. Mound City is there, but it's reconstruction.